G'day poker people, welcome back. We are absolutely roaring through this $50 an hour at 1-3 challenge so far, but we still have to close out the 50 hours for the month in order to get that sneaky little $500 bonus. So naturally I went back on a Wednesday evening, actually pretty late on a Wednesday to start things. It's about 9:45 when I arrive at the casino, get straight into a 1-3 game where I'm really looking to play my best and not fumble the ball as far as the challenge is concerned. So let's not waste any more time and get to gambling. Let's go. We are back in the 1-3 streets for 1,000 bangers. Let's see if we can keep the momentum up on the $50 an hour challenge. I'm in the low jack with ace 2 of hearts. I make it 10 and then I only get called by a passive cutoff. So we are heads up to a flop of 10-10-8 rainbow with 1 heart. When the action's on me, I like checking as a default when I'm out of position anyway, but I think even more so when we do have a little bit of showdown value with ace high, but it's going to be hard to get called by worse / fold out better. So no brainer check spot in my opinion, and the cutoff checks as well. So we get a free turn, which is the 6 of clubs, no help to us, but now I kind of want to stab at it. I think the opponent doesn't have much when they check back on the turn, so good spot to get a bit of equity denial with a bet, maybe fold out some better ace X, so I go ahead and make it 15, and then the villain calls. So I think it's pretty likely that they could have turned a 6, or maybe they have straight draw. Not totally impossible that they do have a better ace high, so whatever the case, we are heads up to a river, which is the 10 of diamonds. Now, we do beat all of my opponent's missed draws and could go ahead and bet here to try and fold them off of a 6x combination, but I think it's a bit thin and most of their folds will just be hands that we already beat anyway. So I check it over to them, hoping that they check back, and they do not. They go ahead and bet 25, and my initial instinct is just to fold here. My opponent could definitely have a full house on this run out. Having said that though, I was actually a little bit skeptical in game that my opponent would bet a 6x hand. I guess the fact that they use a smaller bet size, maybe they would with pretty much all of their full houses, but I didn't think a passive opponent would try and go that thin for value. So then I'm like, are they just bluffing with like queen jack or jack 9? And I get tempted in game. I do throw in the call, and then the villain shows me king 6 offsuit. So bad read there. They were betting the 6 for value. Next up, we have a double board bomb pot. Let's go. Love these bloody things. Like them even more when I have the button with pocket 10s this time. So things are looking pretty daisy so far in the bomb pot. Whatever the case, we are 7 ways to 2 different flops. The first one is 5-3 deuce with 2 spades. The second one is jack 5-4 rainbow. So we do have the overpair on the first board and a decent pair on the second board. There's 4 checks and then a tight aggressive low jack goes ahead and bets 35. The cutoff calls and the action's on me, and I think this might be a good spot to call. The chances that we're good on the top board is very likely, and the cutoff could be betting with a hand like jack X with nothing on the second board, which we do chop with. Gets a bit dicier when you've got the cutoff V pipping and a bunch of people left to act, but I really think folding here would be a mistake, particularly when we had the button. Maybe if I was a small blind I would fold, but I don't think we should fold when we have the button. So I do throw in the call, and then the under the gun player comes in as well. So we're actually 4 ways to 2 different turns. The first one is the 8 of hearts, and the second one is the 4 of clubs. Checks to the low jack, who actually leads out for 140. The cutoff folds, which is good, but I think it's pretty dicey in this spot. We do chop with a lot of the villain's range. Like if they have a naked 4x, then we're going to chop with that. Unless it's 6-4, which actually does scoop us. Get scooped by pocket 5s and stronger overpairs as well. Although I don't think they're as likely. I think it's pretty likely my opponent is just leading because they have a 4x, maybe a full house on the second board. A lot of these hands we're chopping with, and we are going to get to have position on the river. So I do decide to throw in the call here. Maybe it's a good spot to make a disciplined fold. We are getting scooped pretty often, to be honest, and calling to chop is always pretty dirty. So whatever the case, I do make probably a slightly losing call, and then we're heads up to 2 different rivers. The first one is the 3 of clubs, and the second one is the 2 of hearts. So not really loving either of these runouts. We get scooped by 6-3 as well as 6-4 now, and the opponent keeps betting at it. They go ahead and make it 500, and I think on this run out it's probably either saved us from getting scooped or we did cop a bad beat on the river. Either way, I just don't think we can be defending with this hand, so I make what I think is a pretty easy fold at this point, and I get rid of my pocket 10s, although I do wish I folded 1 street earlier and saved myself a 140 bet there. It's going to add up for the challenge, to be honest. That's a lot of hours when you're playing trying to make $50 an hour. Next up, we got the button straddle on. Let's go. Love playing a bit of a bigger game. And then I'm in the big blind with pocket queens. I go ahead and raise it to 25, and then I get called by two different passive opponents. So we are three ways to a flop of ace, jack, jack with two spades. The action starts off on me, and I'm going to go ahead and check it over to two passive opponents who have 1 zillion ace X combinations in their range. So I check it, but then both the villains check as well. So we get a free turn, which is the 8 of clubs. I consider betting here, but I do think it is still a bit thin. Being that the opponents are passive, I wouldn't be totally shocked if they did check an ace X or even a jack X combination on the flop. So I go ahead and check it over to them, playing it a bit cautious, and then they check again. So now at this point, I'm really not concerned about them having a jack or an ace anymore. So when the rivers are 4 of clubs, I actually think this is a good spot to go ahead and bet for value. And honestly, I think I should be using a large size against passive opponents. I mean, if the opponents do have an 8x or a pocket pair that call pre-flop like 9s or 10s, I really don't think that they're going to fold even to a large bet when it's, so close to the river and they've got the passive bias anyway. So I go ahead and bet 50. Pretty happy with this bet sizing. I think an overbet would be too overkill. I'm going to fold out some of those hands sometimes, but I think this is sort of the maximum that, like 8-7 will pay. So I make it 50, the under the gun player folds, and then the button calls. We show our hand, and there it goes straight in the muck. Let's go, getting thin value. You love to see it. So this next hand's definitely a fun one. Before the hand's even dealt, the player next to me, he just asked if I want to flip for stacks. And I'm like, sure, but I actually come up with the idea of just doing red or black majority on the flop because, well, one, I didn't want to slow the game down. So, just him and I could do a flip. And also, two, I didn't want to pay rake on the flip if I didn't have to. Fortunately, the villain agrees and we decide to flip for $500 each. He lets me pick the color, and I always gonna pick black, as Wesley Snipes says, always bet on black. The action actually falls to my hijack for the hand, and I have 7-6 of clubs. Not the widest open in the world or anything, but there's definitely a little bit of extra incentive to try and take the pot down so we don't see a flop when I do have 2 black cards. So I go ahead and make it 10, and then I get called by a passive button. And we go heads up to a flop, really hoping black cards come out, because if there's at least 2 black cards on the flop, we're winning the 500 in the flip. And then the flop comes 6 of hearts, 5 of clubs, come on, black card on the river, 3 of clubs, let's go. We actually win the flip, and in the hand we have a massive combo draw with a straight flush draw and top pair. So I really don't think I could have gotten better flop unless I flopped a high hand or something. So the action's on me, and I actually decide to check it over to the button, really hoping that they're going to stab at it, and even if we take a free card, we're not totally concerned when we do have such a strong hand. So I check it over to him, he checks back, and then we're off to a turn, which is the ace of clubs. So we actually make our flush. Boy, we're on hot for this hand. I want to go ahead and bet here just to try and get value from my opponent's ace-x combinations. So I put in the bet. I made it 15 in game, but honestly, I think this is a bit small. I think sizing up to 25 or even larger makes more sense. I mean, the passive opponent either has an ace-x or he doesn't. I don't think he's going to be that elastic in terms of what bet size he'll call. It's probably a bit of misvalue here with a smaller bet, but I made it 15, and fortunately the villain does throw in the call, as if we're not running hot enough already in this hand. So we are heads up to a river, which is the 9 of spades. Pretty innocuous seeming card. Now the action's on me, and I definitely want to go ahead and bet this hand myself. I do not expect a passive opponent to bet once check to, either with a bluff or any of their ace-x combinations. So need to do the betting myself, and I think I want to use an overbet sizing here. My opponent can still have a lot of really strong ace-x combinations. Plus, if they had 2 pair with their ace-x, I wouldn't be totally shocked either. So there's just so much value to get here, so I definitely want to use an overbet sizing. So I go ahead and make it 50. And then the villain folds pretty quickly. So unfortunate that they didn't really have a strong hand there. I'm guessing they most likely missed a flush draw on the river. But we're definitely not going to complain. Not only do we rake in this pot, but we also win the $1,000 flip. Let's freaking go. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different anti-gambling gambling club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colors. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. After the guy lost the flip, he ended up leaving the table and we ended up breaking and moving to a new table. And this one's got a bit more action because there's not one, but two straddles on, so we're playing a bit of a 1-3-6-12. It's going to be great for the win rate. Whatever the case, the action's on a passive hijack who open limps, and then I'm in the cutoff with ace-4 of hearts. I raise it up to 45, and then I get called by the second straddle as well as the limper. So we go three ways to a flop of 10-8-6 all hearts. Ooh, we just made the nut flush in a double straddle pot. We're running good today. So anyway, the action checks to me. Definitely going to try and start to build a pot with my nuts here. I go ahead and make it 50, and I get called by both villains. You love seeing that. We're three ways to a turn, which is the king of spades. The straddle and hijack check it over to me again. Definitely want to keep putting money in this pot. Don't want to go too big or anything, and we want to give the opponents some room to raise if they did slow play a flush on the flop. So I go ahead and make it 125, and then the straddle calls and the hijack folds. So we're still heads up to a river, which is the jack of diamonds. The straddle checks it over to me, and now in this spot, I don't think we can go ahead and overbet the pot or anything. I do think if the opponent did have a flush, they would have raised on at least the turn, I would think for sure. So I'm going to have to use a little bit of a smaller size to try and price in some of my opponent's hands that are worse than a flush. I still do think they can have plenty of two pairs and sets on this board that aren't raising because they are worried about the flush, and those are going to call a pretty chunky bet. They're not going to call if I go like 700 or anything, but I think they will call if I bet 350. So that's what I decide to bet. I make it 350, and then the straddle is in the tank, probably like a good 20 seconds or so before calling. That's music to our ears. I end up showing the ace high flush, and he ends up mucking. Running high, let's go. So as the session went along, people kept leaving. It is getting pretty late in the evening / early in the morning at this point, and we're down to playing four-handed. Everyone has agreed to do the automatic under the gun straddles, or at least we're playing a bit of a bigger game, but not really looking good for the health of the game, surviving much longer. Whatever the case, a passive small blind open limps, and then I'm in the big blind with ace-king offsuit. I go ahead and raise it up to 30, and then only the limper calls. So it heads up to a flop of ace-6 deuce rainbow. Always fun when you raise up ace-king pre-flop and then hit top pair. The villain checks it over to me, and I go ahead and bet 50. Want to use a bit of a larger size. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of ace-x offsuit hands in their range, and if they have anything worse, they're probably not going to call much of a bet anyway, so might as well just try and get the maximum from the strongest parts of their range. I go ahead and make it 50, and then the small blind snap raises to 100. Like, I put in the 50, they're straight in there with the 100. Nothing to do but call here. The downside of my opponent having a lot of ace-x offsuit hands is that they actually have a bunch of two pairs on this board. It's already a little bit concerned I'm behind, but I'm definitely not going to be folding to a min click when I have position. I throw in the call, and then we are heads up to a turn, which is the beautiful king of hearts. Let's go. We just beat any of their two pairs now. The villain checks it over to me, and they definitely want to put in another chunky bet. I decided to make it 200. I think this is a little bit too small. If the villain does have ace-6 or ace-deuce, they are not folding if I go like 300, so probably missing a little bit of value here, which will hurt me in the challenge in the long run. Whatever the case, so I made it 200 in this instance, and then they do throw in the call. So we are still heads up to a river, which is the 3 of diamonds. Pretty brick if you ask me. Small blind checks it over to me, and now I want to go ahead and bet big again. Really do think my opponent has a bunch of two pair combinations. Can't go all in, I don't think. That probably would scare off a lot of their hands. Plus, not totally impossible that they do have pocket twos or pocket sixes either. Although I do think two pair, there's just a bunch more two pair combinations. I decide to size it to 665 with very slight overbet of the pot. Maybe this was a bit too large though, because the villain is in the tank about 30 seconds before folding. So I do wonder if maybe they made the hero fold with a two pair, being that it would be pretty easy to put me on ace king, and maybe I got a bit too greedy on the river. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So as you probably could have predicted, that game did end up breaking pretty soon after that hand. People didn't really want to play four-handed for that long, so I only ended up getting in 3.5 hours of play today. So definitely think I should make a goal to get in earlier so I'm not there, particularly on weekdays when games are going to break pretty early in the morning / late night. Outside of that, I think I made a few other mistakes today too. I think the ace-deuce call-off on the river is pretty ridiculous, particularly if the opponent is savvy enough to bet a 6x on that river there. It's definitely not in love with that play at all, and I do think I got a bit greedy at the end there with my ace-king 2 pair. I think I butchered the pocket 10s hand in the bomb pot as well. Other than that, I did make some really good plays. I liked a lot of my bet sizings in hands. I think I got a lot of value. Definitely ran hot in hands too, but I think I made the most of it when I did have a strong hand, with that exception of the ace-king hand. So I'm going to give myself a B grade today. Definitely a lot of plays to be proud of, but there's a lot of room for improvement, and I'm definitely going to keep that in mind going forward. Despite a mediocre performance, I am definitely still well on track. Had really good results, particularly for such a short session today, and we are roaring through this challenge, just building and building and increasing that hourly even more, which I didn't even think was going to be that possible at this point, but absolutely over the moon with it. Still a bunch more volume for me to get to that 50 hours before the end of the month, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the next part of the $50 an hour at 1-3 challenge. For now though, I'm out of here. Adios.